Hello, and welcome to Reproductive Freedoms. My name is Sakshi Kumar, and I am the Adult Programs Coordinator at Writers and Books. I am an Asian American woman with short black hair, wearing a light brown shirt and olive green cardigan. Writers and Books would like to call attention to the complex and troubled history of the lands on which we live and work. We are recording this panel from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Onondaga, the people of the Great Hill. In English, they are known as the Senka people, or the Keeper of the Western Door. As I mentioned, this is the Reproductive Freedoms panel. Autonomy over one's own body is essential for a free and open society. In an era of unprecedented rolling back of women's rights, these writers and activists will share attentive ways of thinking, feeling, and responding to our current movement. Our panelists are Sabia Wade, Lainey Zumas, and Amy Wall. Our moderator is Desiree Cooper. Our authors' books will be available through Writers and Books' indie bookstore, Ampersand Books. I encourage you to read their full bios on our website, www.wab.org. Thank you.
Well, Sakshi and Writers and Books, I want to thank you guys for sponsoring this extremely important conversation, one that's ever evolving these days, or should I say devolving, panelists, maybe?
Yeah.
And I have worked at Planned Parenthood. For those who need a description, I am wearing the Planned Parenthood bright pink on purpose today, along with silver dreads and big glasses. I'm a woman of in her third act, and and so in my whole lifetime, this has been a concern for me. And then when I turned to creative writing, I found that that is where the fire in my voice continued. And so the question is then, like, as a person in the movement itself, but also as a writer, where do those things intersect? And how does our writing even fit into the conversation? And so, with that in mind, I'm hoping that we can start with Sabia, who is on the ground in the movement, um, trying to both educate and support the needs of diverse people who give birth. And Sabia, can you give us just a little overview of your work? And then we'd love to hear your voice, your writing voice.
Yes, so I am Sabia. My image description is that I am a Black American. I have a fro hawk. So I have a mohawk shaved on the sides with a fro on top. I currently have on a red strapless shirt. And I am a fairly chocolatey skin and tone person. Um, so about my work, so I am a full spectrum doula, an educator. I have a few organizations that I own, two of them being birthing advocacy doula trainings, where we've trained thousands of people all over the world around full spectrum care. Topics in that full spectrum care could be like full spectrum doula care, postpartum, birth and disability, queer and trans birth, abortion. Like it's a very open, full spectrum. We mean full spectrum, we mean every reproductive experience for everybody. And then I also have a nonprofit called For the Village, which is based in San Diego, California. And we provide about 200 families a year with doula services. And we also provide our doulas with income as well. Um, so I would say my writer's voice is one that is aiming to spread the word of like reproductive justice and reproductive freedom, and what's happening, but also aiming to help people have a better understanding of themselves, so that they can sustain this work. I think a lot of times in this work, especially like working at Planned Parenthood, it's always this go, go, go. There's always something to answer, there's always something to do. And I think a lot of times in this work, we have to be mindful about what we're aiming to do externally, but also what's happening internally in the process. So I aim to write about the work that needs to be done, that we also all have to be a part of, but also aim to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves in the process of doing this work. Specifically in the US, like the overturning of Roe that happened in the last couple of years, I try to emphasize to people that that was a 50-year process, right? It wasn't like a 1-year boom and it was flipped over, right? It was a 50-year process. So how do we keep our eyes on what's happening, keep our hearts and our hands into active mode about what's happening? Also, keeping our mind and our soul in a healthy space, healthier space.
Mm-hmm. So what are you going to read for us today?
So I can read. I was like just literally thinking about that. What I want to read for you all today. I could read a little excerpt from my book about um, generational trauma. I think I could do that today. And I'll make it. Do you want me to read it now?
Sure, I'd love to hear it.
Okay. So just a little context about this is that in Birth and Liberation, I talk about, which is my book, I'll talk about like the history of reproductive justice. I talk about, all that kind of building up to where we are now. And then I go into understanding trauma because I believe that trauma has a lot to do with where we are, and not just trauma in, bodies of color, but also white bodies as well, right? We're all moving through something. So in this, I kind of talk about generational trauma specifically. So I'll just read it. So generational trauma. Last but not least, history cannot be missed in this conversation of body feeding for Black birthing people. During times of slavery and beyond, Black women were used as wet nurses for white families. Traditionally, a wet nurse was a woman who body fed and cared for another family's child. For Black working people of the time, this position was involuntary or a means of survival for themselves and their families. Enslaved Black wet nurses were given the task of feeding the descendants of the very people who held them captive, demeaned them, and thought of them as property and not people. Many non-BIPOC, which is white folks, many non-BIPOC working people felt nursing was not supportive of their lifestyle because it kept them from being able to wear the trendy clothes of the time. The solution to this was forcing Black slaves into doing the work of feeding the non-BIPOC children from their enslaved bodies. Their bodies were also thought to provide natural immunity from malaria to these non-BIPOC children, as malaria was a top killer of white settlers at the time. One of the many downfalls to wet nursing, besides being forced into doing so, was that Black mothers were not allowed to feed their own children with their human milk. Instead, Black babies drank cow and goat milk, which led to higher mortality in Black children who weren't protected from diseases that they would have gained increased immunity from through human milk. Wet nursing also created a large gap in the Black family, as Black enslaved wet nurses were unable to spend time with their own families because of their responsibility to be available at any time for the children of their enslavers. This history of wet nursing and a disconnection of Black parents from their children during a crucial period of nursing, immunization, and connection could still be felt in the Black community generations later. All these factors contribute to the ability or lack thereof of Black birthing people to body feed their children. It is a decision that is very layered, nuanced, and filled with barriers that non-BIPOC people are historically not faced with at the level Black people are. When non-BIPOC are faced with similar factors, research shows that there are more resources available to get through and overcome these barriers. With all these barriers and hardships to body feeding for Black birthing people, are Black people, are Black birthing people really able to have a true choice in a matter of body feeding? The reality is some Black birthing people, especially those with intersecting oppression, such as being low income, disabled, working beyond full-time hours, etc., are often not given a choice to body feed and are instead pushed into formula feeding because they do not have any support or resources that will allow them to body feed their children successfully. Body feeding, a natural occurrence that some people may want to do but feels out of reach, has become a privilege due to the systems and barriers in place to maintain low body feeding rates and higher formula feeding rates for Black birthing parents. In order for that privilege to be an actual option and choice for everyone, many systems will have to change, from educational systems that are currently upholding barriers for BIPOC people wanting to work within the lactation field, to the federal government that currently allows only certain people to receive paid parental leave and have time and space to express milk at their place of employment. This is why the work of collective liberation is necessary to not only overhaul systems, but also to connect people to the humanness of all their experiences beyond these systems. We need and deserve more. So lastly, as Freeman says in Skims, and I quote, but it is hidden by the fact that we think of breastfeeding as a very intimate and personal choice, when in fact, for many people, there is no choice at all. And that is due directly to the acts of the government through law, through policy, through partnership with the formula industry. So I think racial justice needs to incorporate these hidden oppressions that pretend that we're just making choices based on personal preferences, when in fact we're all just responding to our circumstances that are set by forces greater than us.
Amen to that. I mean, wow, you just compressed centuries of oppression into 7 minutes, which is that's a
Yes, and
craft
in the
talk
US,
in and of itself.
yes, and in the US right now is Black Maternal Health Week,
Yeah.
right? And a lot of Black Maternal Health Week is talking about infant mortality, and a lot of it also has to do with like SIDS and this. And we also know that if more Black people were body feeding, that this wouldn't be an issue, but also is it really a choice, right? Like there's all these layers and nuance that come into literal Black bodies being alive.
Mhm. Amazing. Well, we're gonna build on that in just a few minutes. So, Sabia has sort of put the groundwork for us about what's happening and what the work means, what the movement means now, post Dobbs, and in this time of especially embracing all birthing bodies and all reproductive choices. So let's talk to two people who've now taken some of these elements and moved into novelization and what that means for writers. So let's go to maybe to Lainey. Um, I'm thinking about your novel, and tell me a little bit about how it got started, um, Red Clocks, and what drove you to actually decide to put that story to paper.
Yeah, thank you, Des. And Sabia, thank you for that beautiful reading.
Thank you.
My name's Lainey, and I am a white woman with um, dark hair that is pulled back from my face, and I'm wearing a black and white striped top shirt. Um, I started writing Red Clocks coming out of my own experience of trying to get pregnant on my own to become a um, single mother by choice, which is sometimes a distinction that is made, and we can talk about. I'm really glad, Sabia, you started the conversation about choice and the sort of illusion of choice and how that word often gets thrown around, and a lot of people who don't have the privilege to make choices are sort of individually blamed for circumstances. So in my case, I did have, I had a job and I had enough money to, I was sort of fortunate enough to be able to pay for sperm that I bought on the internet. And uh, I was trying to get pregnant and I couldn't get pregnant. And so I was sort of encountering a couple of different things at the same time. One was the kind of medicalization and pathologization of women's bodies in terms of infertility, and this notion that like your body's not doing what it's supposed to do and it's broken, and all of this. And then also I was encountering people asking me like, well, why do you want to do this on your own? Like, wouldn't it be easier to do it if you had a partner and all this stuff? And so we have all these narratives in American culture about um, marriage or partnership, and how that is sort of held up as this family unit. And I was thinking about all the ways in which nuclear heteronormative families are held up by a lot of conservatives to say that anyone who's not living that way is wrong. And so I found myself kind of more directly defending my choice and wondering about those myths. And so I started writing a book about uh, some four women who are all in sort of different circumstances, one as a healer and a midwife, and kind of is off the grid of Western, sort of traditional Western medicine, and one who I'll do a short reading, and this character, I call her the biographer because she's a writer and she's writing a biography of a 19th century female polar explorer, and she is trying to get pregnant on her own. And while she's doing that, the Roe v. Wade has been repealed, and there's a law coming down the pike called Every Child Needs Two, which is saying like only married people can adopt, and which is actually somewhat anyway, we'll talk about all of that. But so she's an IVF is going to be illegal because of the Personhood Amendment, which when I was researching this novel, I was like, that's such a strange, out there, fringe idea that like just only Mike Pence thought, and I mean, I was so wrong, it's like now coming into the mainstream, and we're seeing like at all, all the state level legislation that is essentially wants the Personhood Amendment, granting a fertilized egg the rights of life, liberty, and property, and full citizenship. And so anyway, I was, and I wrote this book. The book was published in 2018, but I started writing it in 2010 when, again, these ideas seemed to me to be pretty dystopian and pretty, not going to come true anytime soon. And I was really wrong about that. So I thought I would share just a little bit from the begin. It's kind of near the beginning of the book, and it focuses on this character I mentioned, who will be referred to as the biographer. At a clinic for women whose bodies are broken, the biographer waits her turn. She wears sweatpants, is white-skinned and freckle-cheeked, not young, not old. Before she is called to climb into stirrups and feel her vagina prodded with a wand that makes black pictures on a screen of her ovaries and uterus. The biographer sees every wedding ring in the room. Serious rocks, fat bands of glitter. They live on the fingers of women who have leather sofas and solvent husbands, but whose cells and tubes and bloods are failing at their animal destiny. This, anyway, is the story the biographer likes. It is a simple, easy story that allows her not to think about what's happening in the women's heads or in the heads of the men and women who sometimes accompany them. A knock on the exam room door, a warning, not a request for permission. In comes a man wearing leather trousers, aviator sunglasses, a curly black wig under a pork pie hat. Hi, I'm Slash from Guns N' Roses, says Dr. Kalbfleisch. Wow, says the biographer. Halloween is my favorite holiday, says the doctor. Shall we take a look? He settles his leather on a stool in front of her open legs, says, oops, and removes the sunglasses. Kalbfleisch played football at an East Coast university and still has the face of a frat boy. He is golden-skinned, a poor listener. He smiles while citing bleak statistics. The nurse holds the biographer's file and a pen to write measurements. The doctor will call out how thick the lining, how large the follicles, how many the follicles. Add these numbers to the biographer's age, 42, and her level of follicle-stimulating hormone, 114.3, and the temperature outside, 56, and the number of ants in the square foot of soil directly beneath them, 87, and you get the odds, the chance of a child. Snapping on latex gloves, he says, okay, Roberta, let's see what's what. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the shrill funk of aged cheese and 1 being no odor at all, how would he rank the smell of the biographer's vagina? How does it compare with the other vaginas barreling through this exam room, day in, day out, years of vaginas, a crowd of vulvic ghosts? Plenty of women don't shower beforehand or are battling a yeast or just happen naturally to be scented in the nethers. Kalbfleisch has sniffed some ripe tangs in his time. 2 years ago, Congress ratified a constitutional amendment that gives the rights of a U.S. citizen to a fertilized egg at the moment of conception. Abortion is now illegal in all 50 states. Abortion providers can be charged with second-degree murder, abortion seekers with conspiracy to commit murder. In vitro fertilization, too, is federally banned because the amendment outlaws the transfer of embryos from laboratory to uterus. The embryos can't give their consent to be moved. The biographer was just quietly teaching history when it happened. Woke up one morning to a president-elect she hadn't voted for. His victory provoked glee on the lawns of her father's Florida retirement village and marching in the streets of Portland. In her little town by the ocean, brackish calm. Short of sex with some man she wouldn't otherwise want to have sex with, the only biological route left is lube-glopped wands and Dr. Kalbfleisch's golden fingers. Intrauterine insemination, at her age, not much better than a turkey baster. And I think I'll stop there for time's sake. Thank you.
Wow, it's so gripping, even after all these years since I've read that book. It's just really affecting. You can see where I'm going here. It's like, Lainey was imagining all this stuff. Well, I didn't realize that you started this in 2010, Here we are, and it's not science fiction. And then we have Amy, whose book, We Jane, came out in 2021. Is it, Amy? And so fast forward to another novelist who's trying to look at the tendrils of where politics and sociology and global human rights and everything are going, and making some sense of it by going sort of calling back into time, right? About the Jane Collective. So, Amy, tell us a little bit about the genesis for your novel, and then let's hear where it took you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Des, and thank you, Lainey and Sabia, for reading. I'm really wowed to be here with you both. So yes, as you said, one of the germs of this novel was learning about Jane, which I'm sure you three all know about, but in case anybody listening doesn't, it was a group of women operating out of Chicago in the late 60s who began by sort of facilitating abortions, helping people find a safe place to go, and eventually learning to perform the procedure themselves. And they operated that way basically up until the passing of Roe v. Wade. And I'm in Canada. Oh, I'm sorry. I should stop myself. I forgot to introduce myself properly here physically. So I'm Amy Wall. I'm joining from Montreal. And I'm a white woman with brown hair, shoulder length. I have glasses, and I'm wearing a black shirt. So as I said, I'm joining from Montreal. I'm originally from Newfoundland and Labrador, which is an island off the east coast of Canada. And that played a big role in my thinking about abortion, about access to reproductive care of all kinds, because the context in Canada is slightly different, but we face some of the same issues in that abortion has been decriminalized in Canada since 1988. But it's essentially up to the provinces to provide. The provinces manage healthcare here, and they receive funding from the federal government that is contingent on the fact that they provide healthcare according to the law. But there is not a lot of enforcement on this when it comes to, for example, access to abortion. So this has been something that's been on my mind, forever, as a person who lives in a body that can get pregnant and who grew up in a rural place where, yes, abortion was legal, but would I have had access to it? And I moved to Montreal a little over 10 years ago, and then it just became even so much clearer to me, like how easy it is here. You could walk down the road to a clinic. Now, there are still barriers for for different people, depending on, you know, how newly they arrived in the country. For example, do they have their healthcare card? But the difference was sort of staggering to me when I realized just the difference in access. And then when I was reading about Jane, I thought, well, for one thing, it's a great story, you know, like they did really amazing work. And then my little sort of novelist brain was also like, God, I love this story. I find it so beautiful, this group of people operating under this umbrella name of Jane. So these were sort of the germs of my novel, which is set like in the present day. I started writing it in 2014. It came out in 2021. And I was sort of thinking, well, what if we had Jane, but it was now and in rural Newfoundland? And, you know, that inevitably, sometimes I would have these moments of doubt. People would sort of react like, we don't need that now. You know, this is not some dystopian near future. But you know, there are dystopic elements already, as we've said. It's sort of like, I feel like in Canada sometimes we're sort of like lobsters in the pot going, this is okay, right? It's not too hot. This is fine. This is fine. But it's not fine. It's not fine for a lot of people. And so that's where I sort of began. I thought like, well, I'll go in my mind, in my imagination, I will go home to rural Newfoundland and I will imagine essentially the novel follows a young woman who goes home to rural Newfoundland to sort of learn from an older woman who is a midwife, but who has been also operating sort of in the tradition of Jane, providing abortion care where needed to women in her community. So I'll read a little short section from the sort of opening of the novel that kind of introduces this midwife character who's called Trish. Jane the First was called Trish before she was Jane. Trish lived in a small cove on the island, hours from town where Jane had grown up. Trish was where Jane went at 25, already married, already divorced. She called Trish, and Trish said, "Why don't you come live with me for a while?" A salt box she'd done some work on herself. Dogs. She said, "Why don't you come live with me for a while? Take some time. I'll put you to work here." Trish was a midwife, the odd woman. She was the only game in town, along that whole part of the shore, really. She taught Jane. She wanted to pass it on. She wanted to ensure a lineage. Midwifery had never really come back into vogue in rural Newfoundland, except in a few pockets where there was an established person and the young hippie types overlapped with people who hadn't gotten out of the habit. There had been some quiet years, but Trish owned her place outright, her mother's house, and she did this and that, a kind of informal home care for some of the older crowd. And she had her garden and she got by. She managed to make her little life. "What I want to tell you, though," Jane said to Martha, "we would perform the procedure." Martha stared, uncomprehending. "She taught me that too," Jane said. Trish's mother had been the seventh daughter of a seventh daughter. You know, Jane said, she had the touch, a healer. Trish, the sixth daughter, who should have been the seventh but for a sister who died at birth. But Trish stayed on when the others left home. She learned at least the manual skills, to be able to take over from her mother, to continue the work. So she was the midwife, and she was the only place you could go. "I guess I just thought they were all so Catholic," Martha said. "Honest to God, though, how does anyone think it wasn't going on, really?" Jane said. So Trish did both, Jane said. At first, Jane had just slept, shell-shocked still. She slept and she went out with the dogs and she used the side door to avoid any women dropping by with the glow on them. Trish was a good midwife. She was tall and strong and sexy in a soft butch way. The women would never have put it that way to themselves back then, of course, but they felt it. They were wary socially. Trish was considered a strange bird. She was not invited to dinner or the baby shower, but they liked being close to her even if they didn't admit it. You could just see it, Jane said. Trish had these hands, an intuition. The women who came for the procedure usually came to the side door too, and at odd hours. Trish would make it so they wouldn't have to run into any of her other clients, even though she privately said it wouldn't be such a bad thing to face up to, the bellies rounding where yours will not. She felt they could handle it. She wanted to give them credit. Those women would sometimes sleep over if they could manage it. Jane had thought it was a lover she was hearing creeping to the bathroom at night. Trish gave Jane a month and then said, okay, enough now, time to get up. Even then, Trish was alert to the possibility that all her work would be for naught. It was the mid-'80s. Roe v. Wade had passed in the States. Morgentaler was opening clinics on the mainland and getting raided and arrested on a regular basis. In Newfoundland, you would have to jump through a series of impossible hoops to have a shot at getting in with the one doctor in St. John's on the one morning a week he'd deigned to perform 2 or 3 abortions. But even if Morgentaler was ever going to make his way down, if Newfoundland was to get a clinic, it would still be in town, and not everyone could get into town. And anyway, more structure and rules and regulation and official blessing was never what Trish had been after. She wanted a living matriarchal line of knowledge to be handed down and down and down, over and over and over, to pass down the control but never hand it over. She wanted us to own it, Jane said. Trish was for the long game. There was always going to be someone with no ride into town, no money. Trish never had much truck with the women's groups and the activists. They were in town and up on the mainland. They were not recognizable. They wanted to articulate clear goals, work from within the system. They talked about incremental change. But Trish wanted to burn it all down, Martha said. I like this, she said, her voice quickening. No, Jane said. I did, Jane said. I would try to rile her up, get her going. But Trish just wanted a side road. She was focused on the there and then, the town. A practical woman, pragmatic. Romantic, too, though. Her whole matriarchal tradition thing is totally romantic, of course. Jane's voice, indulgent. Did she ever get caught? Martha said. No, there was no catching about it, Jane said. She was known. She was the odd woman, you know, that was still back then. She had the herb garden. She had all these salves and charms and tinctures her mother taught her. She was a bit different. Those Bay midwives were always these sturdy, no bullshit ladies. There was no mystical moon goddess shit. And I suppose they knew she was gay, even though no one ever dared say it. They just gave her a wide berth. Jane stayed for 3 years. I feel a little bit in love with her, Martha said, or it's an allure. Were you? Trish was never going to have a wife, Jane said, and she wasn't real into entertaining other people's curiosities. Jane said, what Trish believes and what I believe is important is that we have the knowledge in our hands, that we don't let it pass away from us. She said, God only knows when the next man will get it into his head to start dismantling the system and the laws as they stand now. Or, okay, what about those pills? What if it becomes all about the pills and then one day the pills can't get in? I mean, Jesus, they've got about a week on the island before the fresh food runs out the day the boats can't get in. You think that's not going to get worse? We need to have the skill. We need to have some control of it. Jane's voice was rounding richly now, Jane indulging in great oration, Martha always suddenly remembering once again that Jane had lived in front of a mic for years. What I'm talking about, Jane said, is heirs, apprentices. I'm talking about you having that in your hands now, too. I fucked it up back then. I took off. I'll admit it. I can tell a tale on myself. I fucked off, but we can go back now. It's time. We can be Jane. When Jane talked like this, Martha felt she was being given a gift of a kind of permission to make grand statements, to set out on a mission, to talk about inheritance and purpose and not feel sheepish, to shuck off the skeptical irony her outside life was steeped in and let her earnest believer self out. She would be Jane too. This is what she would do. She didn't press Jane on the vague details, the gaps in the story. She took the story as it was offered. She was eager. She did not cringe. Here was a place to join up. I'll stop there.
Wow, incredible, incredible work. Gosh, I couldn't listen to that without thinking, are we going back to the future? I mean, my great grandmother was a granny midwife who delivered all of her children. And it was commonly known that you could take this or that if you wanted to stop your pregnancy, if you wanted to abort, or you could take this or that to hold your child when you are bleeding or it seems like your uterus is weak. or then you go to the midwife for the actual delivery. So it was the range of reproductive outcomes that were very much embraced by someone that was, in those days, a nanny midwife, very private, very between the person giving birth and the person helping out. And Sabia, that must be pretty much where you're headed, right? In your line of work.
For sure. I think like even with like, so I talk about in my book, and I open my book with like who I'm dedicating the book to. And I talk about them in my book too, but I have been blessed to know 5 generations of like my maternal lineage. Like it was like 5 of us. So it was me, my grandma, my mom, my grandmother, my nana, who's still alive, who's my great grandmother. And also at one point it was my great great grandmother's. She was alive as well. And so even like talking to my nana, who's like 80 something years old, she has dementia, but she still remembers like her births and the this and like the community midwife that would come over and like how they would sit in the house together and like it's this whole thing. But even talking to my grandmother, who kind of experienced like that in between time where she was like, I was in the hospital, but we had the midwife in the hospital with us. Right. And then you have like my mom who was like, I was in the hospital. Right. And then you have me who's like, no thanks. I don't want any of that. But like, right. But like I just see this like this portal, I guess you would say. And in my work, seeing people, especially people of color, being like, well, now I want that midwife experience that your great grandmother had, and your great grandmother had, and like seeing how we're kind of like, just through this portal of time, but also really going back to our traditions. And I really want to say too, like going back to our traditions as like a way of safety, right? Like after really being taught, I mean, even, I'm 35, being taught like birth happens in a hospital, these things happen in a hospital. But of course, when I was like 13, hearing about how babies are made and when they whatever, no one was telling me about the statistics of being a Black person in a hospital. No one was telling me about the statistics about being an Indigenous person in a hospital system. Those are things that I learned coming into doula work. But now it's like that's part of the work, and I think that's part of the work that we're all doing, right? In the different forms and formats that we write in, is like making this conversation just a part of daily life, just daily like knowledge versus having to reach a special point, right? To like get the information that you need.
So it strikes me that both Amy and Lainey, everybody's names kind of have an internal rhyme to them. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Sort of went or looked at it, the dystopian alternatives, and we're reacting to that. And it's gotten far worse than anyone ever thought. I'm just realizing that maybe there is an outcome here that's actually better for women. Like the deeper we're forced into almost secrecy or a birthing person's club about how to give birth, we might be safer and healthier. I don't know.
I
Thoughts on
think
that?
like when I was hearing you all read, right, I was really thinking about reflecting on like the sacredness of birth and how like, as a doula, especially in hospital systems, like one way that we try to protect sacredness is like we're like, okay, you can't have 20 students in here. Like this is not right.
Yeah.
Like this is a person having a child, and they probably, every once in a while you have someone who's like, oh, I don't care, whatever. But like the assumption that this is just okay for us to have 20 people in here to watch this person have like the most intimate experience that anyone can have, right? And I feel like when I was listening to all of your readings, like there was this level of like, how do we return to the sacredness of it? And before it wasn't, birth wasn't something that was put on a like an exam tables for lack of better words, right? It was something that was like, obviously your family knew and everyone knew, maybe even people in your community knew, but there was still like this level of sacredness of like, we're not going to go and like go watch every detail. We're actually going to give them space, right? We're going to ask them if they have what they need. We're going to be in this like external circumference, right? To make sure that we're holding up this space that needs to be held. And I just hear a lot of like that. And whether it's birth or abortion or this or whatever it is, it's just like remaining, it's like coming back into this holding that we're missing a lot of times in our community, in our whether in Canada or all over the world, where there's so much medicalization around
Right.
it that
Right.
sacredness has been really lost.
And with medicalization came a shifting of control, like only the people authorized in that process. And so I think that's maybe where my comment is, like if it's back in the hands of people that aren't medicalized and yet have a lot of wisdom and understanding about the process, um, it's a way for as a society it's a shift. I love that, making it sacred instead where it started. um, oh my gosh, I'm having this is our you guys, you writers out there, this is your new novel. Like the religion of birth, like an actual religion. I guess maybe all religions about the mother or the creator. But like, what if we're talking, the conservative Christian movement in particular taking over the conversation, and what if there was sort of an alternative sacred ritual that also jockeyed for that, and then whose rights would be affected if the Christian rights are preserved, then why
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't this the sacred ritual one as well? Oh my God, go
Well, I
for it,
think
you
like
guys,
like
go.
we have to like be mindful, right? I think like there's and people write about it, and I love to read about it too. Like there's also a commodification to birth, right? Like there's something literally, we know that birth is ongoing, we know that people are going to continue to have babies, right? Just like we also know that people are going to continue to have abortions, like, right? Like, but there's also like this understanding of like this person's body who's giving birth could keep this medical system running, right? Like we might not have as many, this kind of person or this kind of illness, right? Because we also, especially in the US, we specifically run on illness to keep like money going. Um, but it's like with birth, it's like there's always something of financial value there. Um, and that's being abused, right? And that keeps people away from once you start connecting that like, capitalism and money to bodies, right? We get this mismatch in
Mhm.
what we actually need to be doing. Um, and I don't know, even like when how do I say your name correctly? Is it Lene?
Lainey.
Lainey,
Mhm.
sorry. Lainey, like when you were talking about the IUI process and being a single parent, I was like, there's even financial something in that, right? And like,
Oh yeah, it's
and I'm sure
really
you could think more
expensive to
said
do
that,
all. Yeah,
but
totally.
I'm just wondering, like, I was just like thinking about like that financial piece of like when things are acceptable and when they're not acceptable, but also how that has to do with the financial understanding of where we are in our world, depending on who's the president, who's this, what's the focus, like, and how that just shifts.
Lainey, have you tried to, i- in your mind, stay on topic with red clocks, like to follow up, or do you look at the headlines and you look at the IVF, how that got looped into the Dobbs and go, I told you guys, we knew this was coming. Like, what is
I,
your reaction to today?
I mean, I think for so many of us, just like kind of watching. I mean, I think as someone mentioned earlier, I think maybe Sabia, like the the repeal of Roe has been going on since 1973, like when people were like, oh shit, like this, we need to do something about this. And I think for me, like um, as a kind of occasional student of history, like I think we can, like there was nothing about, me personally that was especially intuitive. It was more like I think we've all been kind of seeing the signs, and it's more like they've crystallized, like finally they're like, oh, right. Because I think so much of that connection, we like the ways that birthing bodies have been seen, for like if we look at this kind of oh, this, you're a vessel, you're an incubator, this kind of and it's so linked to capitalism. I think, the idea of like reproduction as, efficiency, and we need the next generation, like, rather than understanding it as something that has privacy and autonomy to it, making it everyone's business. What if if something's in your uterus, like, you're not the only one who gets to think about, I mean, because in a way it's so unhinged to me to just, I pretend like, oh, I'm an alien, I come to Earth, and people are saying like, oh, we're gonna surveil and dictate exactly what happens like inside your body, um it's it's so creepy. And yet I think to a large degree that has been sort of accepted, with in terms of how patriarchy works, and the kind of intersections of patriarchy and capitalism, of what's your body's function, like, you need to contribute, you need to kind of replenish the workforce, all of these things that have nothing to do with that privacy and sacredness, and idea of any kind of bodily autonomy. So I don't know. I think I don't really think about my book too much in it anymore, because I mean, and one thing I kind of, I so want to hear from the three of you too, in terms of how to mitigate despair, because I think sometimes, um like, my anger at everything that's going on turns can turn pretty quickly into like total despair, and I don't want it to. I want to keep the anger, but I'm just
That's
curious,
good.
like, not to turn the conversation, Des, but like, how do you all? I don't know. How do you not go to that place
Yeah,
of
where are
despair?
we going with this? And I think that's a great, great, great question about what is not just what are you writing, but what is the role
Mm,
of writers
yeah.
in the movement? And I think that is really the question of the day for us here at Writers and Books. It's like, what is the role of the story?
Mm.
Um, Amy, do you have some thoughts about that? And maybe just even responding to Lainey's question about and staving off despair. If you can just solve it all
Yeah.
for us, I'd love that.
um yeah, I mean, I struggle with that too, Lainey. It's hard to sort of keep all my feelings in the channel that feels like productive rage, let's say. Um, because it also feels exhausting sometimes. You think like, oh God, I have to take in this whole other new development. And it's tiring. And um, I something you just said really struck me, in thinking about like bodies as vessel with a capitalist sort of purpose, and something I sort of have always kind of reacted to, when it comes when abortion is in the news again, is that there's this reflex on the part of people who are standing up for the right to access abortion, and we have this reflex to say like, if I hadn't had access to an abortion, I wouldn't have been able to do this, or this in my life, like these accomplishments or these things that I've contributed to society. And I understand that feeling very well, but I also think you were allowed to just be. Like, you were allowed to just be a person who didn't want to be pregnant. And you don't have to justify what you've done with your body and your life since. It makes me feel sad, because I think like you were allowed to just not want to, full stop. And you don't have to prove to us that you earned the right to have had an abortion. And so we are just always inevitably drawn back to this like capitalist imperative to have contributed something in a productive way that keeps the machine running. And yeah, sometimes it's like, oh my God, can the wheel stop? Like, how do we keep up our energy in this way? And the things that give me hope are like, the little grassroots things, you know, like I'm in like a Facebook group for that's based in the Maritimes in Newfoundland, where there are a lot of access issues. There are like full provinces where you can't get an abortion in a clinic, and people who arrange rides for each other. You know, they say somebody needs a ride to Halifax, who can put them up, who, and it's like little one by one things. But I'm like, okay, there are people who are maintaining the energy even when others are tired. Like there's a baton being passed on this community level. But it's hard. It's hard not to sink into the despair. I
Well,
have to say.
we have, you guys might remember the author. I'm going to be really mortified that this is going to be preserved in perpetuity in a recording that I can't remember her name. The African author did a great TED talk about the danger of a single story. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you. She was talking more in terms of having diverse stories and diverse writers in the mix, like globally. And to me, that has been one of the powers of writers and storytellers, novelists and nonfiction writers, essayists in the choice movement. And that is, our stories aren't in the dark anymore. And we are able to humanize what it is to be a person who can give birth, or what it's like to carry a fetus to life, or to end the development of a fetus, like what those choices are like. Yes, I can't say her name. Chimamanda Adichie. Okay, I got that in the chat. Thank you. Thank you for saving my life and my reputation. Absolutely, the danger of a single story. Don't you feel like the prevalence of abortion stories, or even the range, like look at the stories that have come out since IVF got caught in the loop of anti choice,
Yeah, and I think
or
too, like
policies.
there's like a lot of like because when you're in this work, like, my life is dedicated to this work, just like all of you here. Um, and I can't get away from it, right? That's like like this it's just the
You
point, right?
can't
There's
just
no
start
way to
another
remove
novel, huh?
Yeah, right. Like there's like no way to remove it, because it's like I'm also the person that I'm talking about, right? I'm also the person that I'm writing about, right? I'm not like, oh, this is this over here, and then I'm writing about this, right? I'm writing about like myself, just as I'm writing about everyone else, right? So that can be hard, but hopefully I'm pronouncing her name right. But Miriam Kaba, the one who wrote "We Do This So We Free Us," right? Like one of the lines that she said in there is like, hope is a discipline. And I think like that is something that really has to be, in terms of despair, right? Like it really has to be something that we really take seriously, right? Just like we would take, our like medicine every day. It's also take like hope and be like, okay, what version of it can I get today? And I think sometimes it shows up in like what I write about. Like there's sometimes where I write about like the thing that people know me to write about, right? Like, let's talk about reproductive justice. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about that. And then there's two ways of writing about it, right? I can write about it in the tone of something that's terrible that's happening, but I can also write about it in something that's beautiful, where we're showing where we're thriving, where we're problem solving, where we're like, like there's these different tones that I can write about it in. And I also like really allow myself to have fun. Like sometimes I'm like, I'm gonna write something that really like has nothing to do with nothing in the regards of like the work that I do. Um, just so that I can like understand that there's so much going on in the world, and there's even more than this like, particular focus that I have. And like I have to strategically, even when I don't want to, sometimes I'm like, I just want to stay in you know what I mean? But I'm like, when I get in that zone, even more so, I'm like, I need to go read something else. Like the other day, I decided to read like this little like lesbian romantic novel thing. And that's not really my like genre. Like I am queer, like that's my genre. But like the romantic, like cheesy, like I was like, that's not really my thing. But I'm going to read it, and it was good. I had a good time. But I think like that's also sometimes like the role of being a writer is like finding stuff for you to read and for you to consume that can like give you the hope and give you a passion or give you something else, especially because we all write about such serious, active despair. Right? It's like finding other things to absorb in the process of moving through the world.
I think that is so good. And hope is a discipline. I love that. I'm going to have to put that on my forehead. Because I get despondent. It's really hard. And it's hard for me to care for my spiritual self because I feel deplenished so much. I'm sure so many people in this line of work feel, so many people in the world, period, because it's a crazy place right now and we're exhausted. Okay.
Yeah.
But one thing that is interesting to me, and maybe there's something there about how politics make strange bedfellows, literally and metaphorically, that the people who want to have as many kids as possible and would never imagine aborting a fetus are being affected just like the person who never wants, even though their body may be capable of it, never wants to bear a fetus. They're all being spun around. And so maybe at some point we'll look around and go, you know what, this isn't serving either one of us. And maybe we should back off a little, Okay, all right. I see some eye rolls here, but there's some common ground there, isn't it? Or no?
There's so much common ground. I'm not going to try to take up all the space, but like very charged up by this particular thing. Because when we talk about reproductive justice, right, the literal definition is to have or not have children, and people forget that. Like people forget they're like reproductive justice, reproductive freedom, like they focus it so much on having children, have, like have as many as you want, which is a part of it. Yes, have 20. It's not my business, right? But like there's also the other aspect, which is like the choice to not have children. And I think a lot of times, like all of us by nature, that we're just we absorb patriarchy. We absorb these things, right? Unknowingly. And even in the work of reproductive freedom, we judge a person who's like, I don't want to have a kid, right? I don't care that my uterus is top notch. I don't care if I'm at prime age. I don't care that like, what about my lineage? Like what happens, Like I just had a hysterectomy 3 months ago, right? And like I knew if I would have known 10 years, like when I originally, because I had like fibroids and stuff like that, like when I originally was like I'm 35, when I was 28, I think I had the choice to have a hysterectomy because my poly life was awful, right? And I decided to like go with this other surgery, get an IUD, do that whole thing. And like I look back now and I'm like, why didn't I just get a hysterectomy? Like I never wanted to have kids. I knew I never wanted to carry a kid. I knew that I had no interest in that. Like I've known that since I was, however, like 18 plus. Like I knew that that was never, even before then, like knew that that was not the path for me. But even at that moment, I felt that societal pressure of like, well, what if I change my mind because I'm 27, 28, and like maybe it'll just like a flower will bloom and I'll be like, I want to have a kid, like, because I had heard about that, right? You read about
Yeah,
that,
I
like,
mean,
oh,
and you hear from
I'm
the medical establishment if you
exactly
feel like
right.
you want
Like
you're
a
gonna regret it.
you're like
you're
regret
gonna
it.
regret it.
Yeah.
You're gonna have this change. You're gonna this whole thing, but you don't hear about now that I'm older. I hear about, different women and folks in my space that are like, I never wanted to have a kid. I knew that. But now I'm hearing that later at 35. And I'm like, I wish that conversation to not have children was as loud as it was in my, like, as it could have been, it should have been in my 20s, as much as the story of like having children was like, that's the ultimate goal and mothering and parenting. And I'm like, I wish we would have, like, everyone is able to hear all of it, not just one side of it.
I
Totally.
think that sometimes, go ahead, Lainey, I'm sorry.
No, I mean, 110%. I think, and it gets back to that question about having more stories, right? Like having a much vaster array of stories, because I think, one thing that I do feel hopeful about is the fact that we're finally like getting rid of this abortion as tragedy story, which is, it's like, I just feel like for years in any, whether it's a movie or a book or a newspaper article or like People magazine, it's like, oh, well, this was like the most traumatic thing in my life. I mean, I know a lot of women who've had multiple abortions who are not traumatized by them. Some people are traumatized by, I mean, again, there's a wide range of experience. And so we don't have to have this like after school special vibe around every person who chooses to terminate a pregnancy. Like that goes hand in hand with like, hey, maybe you don't actually need to become a parent to be happy. Like, what a radical idea. But in a way, it is a radical idea because we've just been inculcated with this notion of like what you're supposed to do to be happy. Like you have a partner, you have children, you have this kind of family, and then when in fact chosen family is actually what brings a lot of people like the most joy and security in their lives. And where's that story?
Yeah.
But we're starting to hear it more. Yeah.
It's like there's no room for nuance in a lot of these narratives that it's almost it's such a shame, it's these are such individual experiences, and like you say, Lainey, like one of the things when I was writing this book, I thought if I'm going to write about abortion, an abortion in a person's life is not going to be the turning point of this story, because for so many people it is one thread in a life. It is one event, an experience that affected them however it affected them, but it is not necessarily this great turning point or this traumatic decision. And yet, it's also okay if it's like kind of complicated. Like you're not going to have children. I'm 38. I'm not going to have children. I I feel good with my decisions. And sometimes you have a little bloom of something. It's of like, is that grief? Is that wondering? And it's a feeling, and that's a human feeling. And it doesn't undercut my decision to say
as
sometimes
with
this is a
many
complicated.
who have had children who have that little blooming saying,
I
woof,
was just about to say that. I have like, oh my
woof,
gosh,
why
I'm like
did I
sharing
do
too much.
that? Or
But
wouldn't my
there's
life
like,
be better? Yeah.
there's a group on Reddit that's called Regretful Parents. And like, I'm in there, right? And like, first of all, I feel like I want to doula everybody, right? Because it's like, literally, so I'm currently training to be a spiritual director. I'm almost done. I'm also about to volunteer with Faith Out Loud, which has like a call line. So people who are experiencing like abortions and this and the other, but they're having like conflict between their religion and all this, like, and just whatever that movement is. Like, I really found myself in that space, wanting to write more about that space too, because I see it like obviously in that space, abortion space is heavily like I want to get this abortion, but I feel so much conflict because of religion or this and that. And then I also like in this space called regretful parents, like people are just like and you see it's such a similar story where people just told me that parenting was what I was supposed to do. Right. Like they told me this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to enjoy it. And like a lot of times when we talk to our own parents, like they're not going to tell you that it was terrible. Most of the time they're just kind of like, it was hard, but you're here, love you.
Yeah.
But like, but like they don't really talk about like what does it mean to parent? What does it mean on a spiritual level? What does it mean on a mental level? What does it mean for your finances, right? We know that having kids is one of the social determinants for being poor, honestly. So it's like, I wish that there was more about that, and not in a way to have someone pick a side or pick the other side, but just to be more informed about like what does it mean to actually make the choice to be a parent. What does it mean to actually hold a baby in my body, right? Because that's as a doula, that's some of the conversation I have with folks is like, you can be a parent if you want to, but also like, is your body the body that needs to, right? But people feel so like, if it's not me, then what does that say about me? I'm not a real parent. Right. And I'm like, if I have a child, We all know I don't have a uterus, so it's not coming out of me. But I don't feel less of or less than, but I just feel like there's so many, it's just a conversation that needs to be, and I do that work. Like I'm very raw about it, but just like wanted to see even more of that out in the world, because that to me really equals reproductive freedom.
Yeah.
And to have the knowledge of every perspective.
So in the range, and this might be close to our closing comments, but in the range of stories about people and birth and reproduction, what is a story you wish you could read? Like, what is a point of view that you wish was out there? What is the story that will contravene the single story that's out there for you?
Well, honestly, what Sabia was describing of people who regret parenting, I mean, that I feel like is still such a taboo subject.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's so taboo to, and even among, like in conversations I have with people who have kids, and I also have a kid. I have a son, and there's this tendency to be like, this is really hard and it's like breaking my soul, and this is, but of course, like, I mean, and even like my sister who is child free, she'll say stuff to me when I'm talking about something that's really hard, and she's like, oh, but still it's like the most wonderful thing in the world, right? I'm like, that is not helpful, and it's not always true. You know what I mean? And but that's the narrative, I don't like blame, but it's like this, we're supposed to think like it has to be the best thing in the world, and so anyway, I appreciate you bringing up the Reddit, the like regretful parenting, because that story should be out there more. Yeah.
Agreed. Amy, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm also really like that is a story I don't hear, I don't read. And then the sort of mirror of that, like sort of what I was just saying of like a little more nuance in the narrative of a child-free person, that it is not always like, look at my fabulous, independent life free of obligations and I am just coasting through life. For one thing, just because you don't have children doesn't mean you're not a caretaker of somebody else.
Hello.
There are so many ways to have kin and to care and to have a chosen family, and I feel a little like a little bored of the narrative of like, if you don't have children it's because you wanted to go have your fabulous career. And I would like to see more of all of more like of the thornier sides of both of these narratives,
And I do
whichever
feel
choice
like
people make.
the political climate really keeps you from the nuance, because you can't concede any ground without it
Right.
looking like you're
Exactly.
giving one up for the other side.
Right.
Exactly.
And I do think that that's a role that fiction writers in particular can play into bringing the whole story to the page, because there's so much less risk for that story and that writer than it
Right.
would be for maybe someone like Sabia. Maybe, I don't know. I have a feeling she says whatever she wants to say anywhere
I
she
say
wants
whatever I
to
want to say. You're absolutely
say.
right.
But even like with even when, for me, working in Planned Parenthood as an advocate, I felt, I'm not going to put it on the whole organization, but could you ever concede an icky spot? Having an abortion at 6 weeks is very different than having an abortion at 22, 23. And where is a spot for you? And there are people that for them, it's like, yeah, I can't do that. I can't go that far. Early, I have no problems. Later, I have to start having problems. But you can't talk like that. You can't admit that, when you're in the political fight of your life for is it is or is it ain't going to ever
Right.
be law.
Mhm.
So I do feel like nuance is wow, what a watchword for us to be able to take and to be nuanced ourselves, to understand the complicated feelings that we may have. How many abortions is okay? 2 when you're under the age of 30, or 15 in a lifetime? You know, people
Mhm.
have opinions about that, and it's not the same. And it's not just like it's none of my business or it is my business. So at some point, people think, well, now that's kind of getting to be my business. Like, I got to talk to my divine person about that part, you know? So
Yeah.
we are complicated people and we are steeped in our own cultures and
Yeah. And
nationality.
I would definitely say too, like taking in all of your thoughts is like I would love to see a book about like, and I guess in my head I'm speaking very specifically to Black folks right now, like in the sense of like how I see the context. But just seeing a book where like about a person who chose themselves, like through their life, they chose themselves. And I think like not in the way like you all are saying, like to choose yourself doesn't mean that you're like, I don't deal with anything or anyone and I don't parent at all, right? That doesn't mean any of that, right? But it can mean like I know for me, it's like, yeah, I don't have children, right? But I take care of a lot of people, right? I mother in a lot of ways. I parent in a lot of ways. And, for me, I know like a part of I feel like honestly, being child free to this point in my life has been something that's been like intentional because I felt like my ancestors didn't have that choice. It was like you have babies, that's what your life is, right? They didn't get the ability to travel. Like, I'm in Costa Rica right now. They didn't get the choice to like do what they want, say what they want. Like, so I feel like a part of my commitment to my ancestors is like choosing myself, but I would love to see like a book that's written about that and not like Amy was saying, not in the like selfish, I chose my career and I'm skating through life, right? But like even the complexities of like when people look at you like you're doula, you're not gonna have kids, you're this, you're not gonna do this, or you're just, even family, being like, oh, so you can just travel and do what you want. You're like, yeah, right. So I would just love to see like I would love to see like a book written about that, bringing in the nuance and bringing in the mental struggles and bringing in like even the hardships of making those choices when you haven't been programmed to do that,
Yeah.
especially as like a Black identifying person. Because I feel like there's so many, we see people like we see the aunties, like at least in my life, like we see the aunties who are like 55, 60, and they didn't have kids or whatever. And you see them at their glory, you're like, wow, you look healthy. Like you look good, right? But you don't actually hear about like what was their journey to that because they're one of few in your family dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. It's just, I feel like we could probably go on forever. I love you guys. I love your brains. And I love all that you've brought to the conversation that we can't actually have anywhere else. I mean, it's hard to have it in your place of worship, most of them. It's hard to have it in your communities and your families. It's often hard to have in government, possible in government and political ways. And so what we have is each other, and we have words that matter and that are transformative. And I'm going to just say, deploy them like a weapon, folks. If you're a writer, it's like think about what the battle is and where you can line up in there, not on sides, but on the side of nuance, complication, and compassion. So that would be my parting words. But I want to thank you guys for being here, everyone for coming to the panel, Writers and Books, for sponsoring this incredible conversation. And if you hadn't known them before, you know them now. Um, Amy Wall, Lainey Zumas, and Sabia Wade. Three amazing people. Please look them up, follow their work, and get out there and put your own voice into the mix. We need you.
Thank you, Des, for your beautiful facilitation. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that thank you to all of you, Amy, Des, Sabia, and Lainey. That was incredible. I wish I could hear you guys talk forever. That was really, really such a memorable and urgent conversation. And yeah, as a reminder, everyone's books will be available through Ampersand Books, and you can order them online or come to our bookstore in person. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.